Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring honest conversation about what it means to be a woman, a mother, and in business. I'm your host, Farrah Haidar. Today, we will be discussing personal branding, and joining me is Victoria Pelletier. Victoria is a 20 plus year corporate executive and board director. She is currently a managing director at Accenture. Nicknamed the Turnaround Queen by former colleagues and employers, Victoria inspires and empowers her teammates in leading psychological turnarounds, which are as much about changing mindsets as it is about restoring and growing revenues and profitability. Victoria was recognized as a top 50 business leader in technology by Insight magazine in 2021 and a Mentor of the Year by Women in Communications and Technology in 2020. HSBC Bank awarded her the Diversity and Inclusion in Innovation Award in 2019, and she was IBM's #1 global social seller, ranked by LinkedIn in 2019 and 2020. As a prolific motivational and inspirational speaker, Victoria has delivered keynotes discussing the importance of personal branding and its impact on professional growth. Being an empathetic leader and empowering employees, the power of DEI on corporate cultures, and building a life of resilience. Okay, Victoria, that is one long and impressive bio. But what strikes me about it, though, is you're in corporate America. So a lot of the people I know that are in corporate America are less concerned with their personal brand. They have a resume and a LinkedIn profile, and that's about as far as it goes, right? They might even be reluctant to post on social media because they don't want it to interfere with their corporate job. Now, people are more interested in being, an influencer or having their own business. I see them showing some interest in becoming a personal brand, but often whatever they're selling kind of takes over. So I'm really curious about what brought you to the conclusion that having and building a personal brand was important.
So, Farrah, thanks for having me here today. And yes, I'm sorry that the bio was so long for you to read. Um, and so, the topic's near and dear to my heart. So, personal brand for me is important because at the end of the day, people do business with people they like and they
Mhm.
trust, and therefore they want to do business with. And I shifted 20 plus years ago from, banking and business to consumer into a business to business environment. And there's lots of choice and competitors across every industry, quite frankly. And at the end of the day, in leading large teams and businesses, if I was going to go head to head and competing with a competitor, at the end of the day, beyond quality of services delivered and price, there's more that they're buying based off of. And that's the unique value differentiation that I and my teams bring holistically. So we needed to find a very different way to articulate that than, again, a great logo on the wall and pricing and PowerPoint presentation.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I do agree B2B is very different than B2C. I think people are actually less risk averse on B2C than they are with B2B, right? Like you hear that thing, nobody ever got fired for buying from IBM, right? We've all heard that phrase.
Right.
So maybe having a personal brand, do you think it's about trust?
Oh, 100%. And so when I, say that people do business with people they like and they trust, and therefore they want to do business with, it does come down to that. So, trust, and this needs to come across in one's personal brand. Trust is about vulnerability. Thank you, Brene Brown. And so, how do you be vulnerable? How do you be authentic? How do you build connection with people? And so we're doing that in a world of, electronic, and I often talk about electronic courage. You can sit behind a screen and connect with people through LinkedIn, but as they follow you and engage, and as people do research to buy from you or work for you as you're looking to hire, they're doing some research. And I want people to know that I am more than the title and the job responsibilities I have and the company that I work for. So
Yeah.
personal brand needs to be that holistic view of an individual and how they show up. And that can be, for me as a leader, that's how I am as a leader, the, values that I stand for and will impart upon my team in the organization to drive positive workplace cultures. But also when we talk about building connection with people, those are hobbies and interests and things that are just going to help build an initial bridge to someone until we start to get to know people. And so we need to show up in a very different way online, authentically, because it needs to translate into the real world once we, start meeting people face to face and engaging with them for whether it's a sales transaction or recruiting process.
Yeah, so that's great. So let's talk, like, break down a personal brand a little bit, right? Like, if you were to talk to someone about their personal brand, what would you say would be the main components of it?
So you need to, and I'll tell you, it drove me crazy a little bit and around my time at IBM, and they use the word eminence, and that's one slice of a personal brand. The eminence is the subject matter expertise for which you are known. So, in IBM speak, it could be, you're a data and analytics subject matter expert. Could know how to implement cloud technologies. Okay, that's what you do. And so that is critically important, what you do and the experience you have doing it and where you've done it in the past. So that's element one. Then there's the element around, what is your unique value proposition or differentiation from others who have that same subject matter expertise.
Mhm.
So when you show up to work with someone like me, it'll be, here's how I'm going to engage with you. Part of mine is around being radically candid. And that you're going to get complete transparency from me, and directness. And I've told some of the C-suite executives that, I'm working with, like, I don't think you're paying me, or now that I'm at Accenture, you're not paying us to tell you what you want to hear. Right. And
Yeah.
so that's part of, so that radical candor, and direct nature from a place of care and to move us forward. That's part of, so that's part of my unique value proposition and differentiation from others in the consulting or technology space. And so when people are building it, you need to figure out what's that unique value proposition. Why do people want to work with you versus someone else that comes with that, experience, and background, because there are many, and often in cases. And then there's other parts just around, who you are as a human, right? So not just what makes you different from someone else you're competing against, but who you are as an individual, what values, ethics, integrity, all those sorts of elements. What are the personal interests and hobbies that you have? Again, as we look to build connection, those would be some of the three main buckets. I mean, there's many other things, but it also depends on who are you selling, to, what's the purpose behind you building a brand? Do you want to be an influencer? There's other things I would add beyond that, but I think those are the three broad categories.
So let's say someone is just starting out, right? And maybe they're younger, or maybe they're older, and they just feel like, well, I don't know what makes me different, or I don't know. How would you encourage them to think about their personal brand, or where to start with it, really?
Well, so I spent a lot of time talking about it and coaching. In fact, actually, I developed, while at IBM, the personal brand education for a lot of our leaders to break them out of this view of eminence and what it is they do for their day job. And I've even created worksheets for, people to go through that process and understanding. And so there's a number of things. And first of, what are your goals and objectives? As I said, why would someone create this brand other than it being, I think, a really great thing to do and building it at a time when you don't need it, so it's there for you more
Yeah.
holistically when you do? But what are the goals and objectives you have? Is it to be an influencer in your corporate or professional space, or maybe it's the side hustle that you have, working, you've got your 9 to 5 and then there's your 5 to 9. And so is it
Mhm.
to grow or have a blend of those two? And then based upon understanding what those goals and objectives are, identifying who's your target audience. Next
Mm.
would be, what's your story? I think a big part of your brand and building relationships is about bringing your lived experience to the table. So the other thing I'm really, really passionate about is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the lived experience, both work and personal, are incredibly rich. And so figure out what parts of that story are you comfortable sharing and will help you build that connection.
Mhm.
And then you start to look at what's the strategy in terms of how you're going to do that. From a business or professional standpoint, predominant place to do that is LinkedIn. But if you're really focused in you know, in the business to consumer perspective, you're going to look at alternative channels of Facebook and Instagram and those sorts of things. And so what's your
Mhm.
ongoing presence and how do you want to build visibility? And I would encourage people to go through that, take this really hard look at themselves in the mirror, do some
Mhm.
self-reflection over how they're perceived today. How do they want to be perceived? How do they bridge that? And also find some trusted people to maybe challenge them a little on some of those things around existing skill set, again, visibility and the vision ultimately they have for driving a different brand, particularly if they need to pivot.
Mhm. So let's dive into this a little bit because I find it really fascinating. We're all multifaceted. A lot of us have multiple interests, and I think that's for me where I find it challenging sometimes with personal branding. Just coming from a marketing background, they're always like, narrow it down, be very specific, have that succinct message. This is what you're known for, right? But I'm someone who has multiple interests. I own a bakery, but I run a podcast, but I also do voiceover work, but I also write, and I just sometimes I struggle with the personal branding stuff is, how do you fit all that in? And maybe it's, all that in. Let me just leave it there. How do you fit all that in to this little snapshot?
It's tough, and like you, Fair, I have a multitude of interests, and I think it's my personal email signature line. I actually describe myself in my title as a multi-potentialite, right?
Mhm.
So this diverse set of interests that I have, and so if it's too diverse, I do think you need to curate the plan for which you're going to share and articulate that again with different audiences. So if I think
Mhm.
from a professional standpoint, yes, I'm a long time forever, it seems like corporate executive, but I also do public speaking, which is a lot of what brings me great joy. And I talk on topics that in many instances are connected to my work, but others are just passions of mine. And so when I share all of those pieces, I've got this um, brand, personal brand that is a combination of all of those, which means that when I post on LinkedIn, however, that is my LinkedIn, Twitter, I'm on every or most social platforms, I should say. There's a slight tweak for some of those. It's always the same message, but again, in terms of where I might focus, changes. So, on my Facebook and my Instagram accounts, that's much more about my public speaking work. So I'm going to spend more time there. But I also talk about topics like leadership and culture and diversity and
Mhm.
inclusion. So I think you need to be really clear first around what are your goals and objectives? Is it to be an influencer? Is it your quote unquote day job and you're just trying to build a stronger brand awareness and sell more business? In which case, we're going to focus a little bit more there. Is it your side hustle? And I do think you should talk about the two because again, you're a whole person and it might be what, connects you, but you need to get really crisp around what's the vision and mission in terms of the goals and objectives you have, and then kind of work back from there in terms of how much of the diverse interests you have you're going to share, and or is it different in terms of where you post and share that based upon the audience that are on those platforms.
Yeah. So I want to touch on before I move on. I have more questions to delve deeply in this, but I wanted to touch on the diversity and inclusion because it's come up a couple of times. Just as someone who comes from, I don't know if I can say it, but diverse background, like I'm Muslim, et cetera. There have been definitely times in especially in my corporate career, when I have held that back. Like, just like it has no place here at all, especially because I actually kind of graduated from master's. Like, I started my master's degree and really my corporate career right after 9/11.
Mm.
So, I I want your thoughts on how to deal with that thoughtfully, because I think it can, and I think a lot of people who are diverse feel that it does hurt them in a corporate setting or even in the world in general.
Uh, well, that would be disappointing if it does. That's the reality. I get it. I do think in North America in general, I'm not going to speak to other parts of the world. I actually think it's becoming more and more of a help for
Yeah.
individuals. I mean, it has shifted dramatically. I'll tell you, like I got involved in DE&I, 20 something years ago because of my personal experience. When I was promoted to COO at age 24, I was the only woman at the boardroom table, and I was the youngest by 2 decades. And I am part of the LGBT community. I was married to a woman back then. I am now married to a man today, and I've been openly queer since I was 14. And so
Mhm.
I felt those three things, even though I'm a Caucasian woman who was born originally in Canada, which gives me some privilege, I still had these other things that I had to experience. So that's where mine comes from. And my focus on it originally. And what we've now seen is business or employee resource groups have been built to look at, the underrepresented or marginalized communities within these organizations. And particularly over the last couple of years, I just saw a massive shift, post George Floyd, here in the
Yeah.
US. And so what we're seeing are organizations recognizing that, DE&I is not just the right thing to do within their organizations, it is good for business. A
Mhm.
majority, and I get there's outliers, and we've seen a lot of that sadly still. But for the most part, what we're seeing is employees and customers want to do business or work with companies that align to their personal values, and are also, working with and buying from employees that look like them, or the communities in which they sit and serve. And
Okay.
so I think it's a more positive thing than not, but I also understand the perspective of many who feel like it could continue to hurt them, because there's going to be some people who are still going to say some hurtful or hateful things. And the reality is, whether it's, gender equality, or for people of different, race and religions, we're, not necessarily seeing equity just yet. The needle needs
Mhm.
to still move.
Mhm.
But I personally encourage people to bring their entire lived experience to the table, and help those who have privilege understand what it looks like to sit in your shoes and experiencing hatred, coming out of, as you said, 9/11 into the workforce.
Yeah. I will give you that. It's definitely changed 100%, from when I was, young and 23, 24 to now. Definitely, definitely changed. I would say that, yes, I think there still is backlash. I don't think we've seen the end of the backlash, because now it's like, oh, everyone's so focused on DNI. You only got here because you're DNI, right?
Mhm.
Which we've heard in some variation or form throughout decades ago. I mean, that's not a new concept either. Like, they even used it on Obama. Oh, he only got into Harvard because he was black, you know? Yeah. So it's just like, it's going to be interesting to me to see. So yeah, I think that sometimes, as much as I hate to say it, if you are DNI or if you feel that way, it's just something you live with until it's going to get better, unfortunately. But I think that honestly, I will say this, that I have found that hiding it actually hurts me more than sharing it sometimes.
Mhm. I'd agree.
Yeah. It takes that initial courage, but then once you're out, you're kind of out, and that's that's it. Yeah, there's no going back from there. Okay, so let me go back a little bit. F Some people, and I will include myself in this, is, we're shy. Or we're private. And a lot of personal branding happens on social media, which includes a very diverse set of audiences, in terms of you have your family there and your friends and your high school friends and maybe people you don't want to be friends with anymore and all that kind of stuff. So what's your advice for someone who's shy or private? Like how can they overcome that, or just brand in a way, because I think you do have to use social media to personally brand these days, right?
You do. Sadly, these last couple of years with the pandemic really, demonstrated to us all the fact that we're staring into these square boxes when we sit on, video calls with people and looking into their homes, and we don't have the opportunity to look in the whites of one another's eyes directly. And so what do? We hop on Google or go on to LinkedIn or wherever it is we're researching someone. And so it is critical to be online to build that brand. What I would say though is, again, I go back to what are your goals and objectives for building your brand? One, and two, what do you not want that person you went to high school with or your family to know about you that they don't already? And so it gets back to this place of building authentic connections with people. Um, and talking about who you are as a leader or a person in the in business or in community, like what would you not want to share, right? And so
Yeah.
I mean, then that becomes part of like crafting that personal brand. Like a big part of developing a personal brand is you controlling the narrative, not
Mm,
letting others say something about you when you're not in the room. You will have controlled that. And so that's the part I would ask, right? And there might be stories you might not want to publicize broadly across the internet, but
yeah.
ultimately your brand's going to be a view of who you are holistically as an individual. And I think it's important, going back even to that, diversity and inclusion bit, to share a little bit of that lived experience or that you've had to, again, build connection. So brand, by that, it's also an extension when I talk about personal branding into how you network, how you engage and connect with people. So I guess that would be the question, I'd ask, what are you afraid of sharing
Yeah.
publicly?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent question. I'll let the viewers answer that for themselves. I'm not going to go out and answer it for me. I mean, I think some of it just came. Honestly, it's like PTSD from when I started. I think that's part of it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and now that I own my own business, it's kind of like, but then I deal with customers, and then it's like, yeah. So it's like goes back and forth. But I do agree with you. I think at some point you just have to say it is what it is. And I will say this. I think people have a sense for inauthenticity, or when you're not saying things. It's not like they pinpoint it, but they can tell something's off,
Mhm.
and it makes you less trustworthy.
Right.
And I actually learned this. I'll share this with you. I was in my MBA class, and we did this. We were in this negotiations class, we had to negotiate. And I am like one of the most honest people. Like, I'm a bad negotiator. I really, really needed that class. I've gotten better, but I was. And one of the things that shocked me was the feedback came back, and my fellow classmates had ranked me as untrustworthy.
Mm.
And I was super shocked. I'm like, "Me? Like, I never lied in my life. Like, I'm totally transparent and da 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 da." And the professor was like, he's like, "First, I don't agree with that assessment. But second, he's like, I think what happens is because he's like, you were almost too honest. Like you were, he's like, you weren't revealing everything. They can sense something's off. Like you're not revealing everything, but you're not really lying. So that's actually kind of threw them more than else. So, anyways, so I guess being honest, as we said before, helps.
Yeah.
Um, so let me talk about. Give me an example, some examples of how your personal brand made a difference for you.
So I made a shift, as I said, from like the business to consumer world to B2B. And you see a woman who stands before you who's much of an extrovert now and stands on stages speaking to hundreds or thousands of people.
Mhm.
I wasn't always like this. I grew into my extroversion, quite frankly. And so for me, I probably wore a mask initially in my 20s and for a period of time, given some of my lived experience and childhood adversity, my fear of failure and rejection, of imposter syndrome. And so I showed up in a very different way, the way I thought people wanted or to see me. Again, because of all of those reasons, also as I was building connections with people, I was also all business all the time, and I hadn't learned as much about the importance of this kind of connection.
Mhm.
And so even I'd walk into a meeting and like launch into like the agenda, not a lot of bridge building and rapport and relationship building. And so I had a damaged brand to some extent. I was known for being excellent in delivering results in business, but not necessarily as the connector of people. I think a lot of people feared me versus liked me. And I don't need to always be liked in business. Sadly, you're going to need to make difficult decisions sometimes. So I had to make this very conscious pivot in my own brand to show up, and also that not just curate that message and that narrative in a very different way. I also needed to start doing things differently. So for me, I needed to lean into the things that made me uncomfortable. And that was sharing more of my personal story and why I was as driven and or had some of these fears and anxieties that I had, to give people some understanding of where I was coming from. And I also, needed to be, much more vocal around my values from a leadership perspective and the types of culture I wanted to drive. And so for me to do that in a much more public forum, I'm a very early adopter of LinkedIn. And so we're
Mhm.
talking about, 20 something years ago as an executive in this B2B space, I learned quickly that I could leverage that platform to help, as people did their research on me, as much as I was still actually trying to improve myself as a leader. So what I saw was significant success in the number of connections I made, the authenticity and real connection that I made, and ultimately actually also from a followership perspective in terms of the people that I work with. Now, that isn't all brand. That was me fixing the way I actually was leading and showing up on a daily basis, but made sure that translated into the way that the world externally and viewing in would see me as well.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions here. First, what led you to that epiphany? Was there a moment? Did someone give you the feedback? Where did it come from?
There were two things, Farrah, that contributed that to me. So one, I learned that I had a nickname at work called the Iron Maiden.
Oh my God.
Um,
Oh God.
and so initially, although I will tell you that, like, I heard it and I was like, oh, is that like an insult? Should it be complimented by? Like, I've been through 18 mergers and acquisitions and tons of reorganization that I'm usually leading. So I'm like, oh, that's unfortunate. But um, I thought I understood where it was coming from. But the second thing, and it was the connectedness between these within just a matter of months. I came in one Monday morning talking to a colleague about what I'd done on the weekend. And I said I'd seen some movie and I had been bawling and I didn't have enough Kleenex in the movie theater. And she looked at me and she's like, oh my gosh, Vic, I thought you'd be the type of person who'd laugh at people who cried at movies. And that
Mm.
literally crushed me. I'm like, if that is what you think of who I am as an individual, like my nickname is Turtle. My best friend nicknamed me that because I've got a very tough exterior I can shoulder and have dealt with significant adversity, but I'm all mush inside. Like I cry at, the Humane Society commercials on TV.
Yeah.
And so it was those two things within a short period of time where I said, well, clearly I am doing something wrong if that is what people's perception of me is. And so I knew I needed to look at the woman that stood across from me in the mirror and do things very, very differently. And it was uncomfortable. And I needed to change my thoughts, my language, and my behavior to start to become the type of leader and the type of individual that I would want to work with.
So let me ask you this. Was there someone that you looked up to or you see? Because I know that when I kind of come to that realization, because I can be a little shy and introverted, um, there were a couple of people that I see and I go, man, they are good at this, right? They are just good at creating that connection. They walk in, they tell a personal anecdote, suddenly everyone likes them. And I've seen people win contracts just on being liked, right? So was there someone that you looked up to or was a roadmap for you?
I, as it related to my role in leadership, I didn't have a mentor. In fact, I probably looked at other people and saw really, really poor examples. And they actually set those for me to say, I want to be nothing like them. And so that helped informed, and plus hearing, perceptions about myself, that changed from a leadership perspective. As it related to my role in leading people and winning business and that shift, I saw some great salespeople for sure. I mean, there wasn't
Mhm.
one in particular. I was fortunate. I worked predominantly for large global organizations. So I've had the opportunity working with a lot of people. And there was a few of them that I observed who I just thought were exceptional in terms of their comfort and confidence walking into a room and engaging with complete strangers and building that instant connection and like from the people in the room. And so I spent a lot of time just sitting. I'm an avid people watcher.
Yeah,
And
me too.
so spent a significant amount of time just trying to observe them and see, like, what are they doing? And again, some of it was just not natural for me. That my
Mhm.
nature was to, come in and be all business. I'm ready to get to the PowerPoint. I'm ready to tell you what it is we can do for you, rather than taking the time, you talk about what happened on the weekend, talk about their family or the things that are meaningful to them. And
Mhm.
again, that wasn't natural for me, but that was initially. I mean, now it's so innate. I mean, I think it drives my husband crazy. Like, we'll go into an elevator, I'm like talking to strangers. Like, I'm doing it with everyone now, but it was
Mhm.
really watching some of the people who've been highly successful in doing that and recognizing that, again, it's, that likability factor, comes with, in some cases, initiating it, which I know,
Mhm.
for those who are introverts will not always feel comfortable.
Mhm.
There's electronic courage, by the way. So for your listeners here, there's a lot that can be done, sitting from behind a screen. But
Yeah.
doing it in real life also means leaning into a couple things that were not something I would have done previously.
Well, I think that I'm so glad you said that because I think it's a skill that can be learned. And a lot of people learn it. Like when I started paying attention, and I'll never forget, I was listening to a talk by very famous, very like I won't bring his name up, but and he literally revealed the secret. He's like, "Oh yeah, I have this one story I tell every time I start a meeting." And he told us the thing, and he's like, "But think about what they've learned at me. It seems like a random story, but think about what they've learned at me. I'm a nice guy. I love my family. I'm this. I'm that." And he does it deliberately. And I'm looking at him going, "Oh, I thought that was just like, no, it's not natural." A lot of people do learn how to do it. So one of the things that I like when I talk about mentors, like I look at people like obviously I own a bakery, I own an e-commerce food business, and I look at a lot of other successful e-commerce food businesses. And one of the things that I began to notice is a lot of, especially in my space, a lot of these, they're not really a brand that's attached to that has a personality. It's really a personality that attached a brand, right? Like they were the chef, and then oh, there's these products on the side, but how they show up and their personal brand is very much about the chef part. Do you think that the days of like just anonymous founders, just like this is the company, a company only brand is kind of over?
Um, I think it depends. Quite frankly, I spent a lot of time working in the startup community and working with, and so there's is the product or service really unique and differentiated, and is there a need for it? And so that can certainly propel them forward. But then I go back to differentiation. When there's a multitude of them, what is it, and why are people, going to choose? I mean, a brand, if we think about it from a company perspective, it is the feeling and emotions that get elicited by some of these. So, I said I'm originally from Canada. So Tim Hortons is the big coffee chain there.
Yep.
I'm actually not even a coffee drinker. Uh, but what I think about from Tim Hortons or Timmy's, if you're Canadian, that experience. I mean, that's about, good coffee and donuts quickly and drive through. And like if you play hockey, like, picking those up on, your way to the arena versus Starbucks, right? For me, when I think about Starbucks, it is about an experience, the opportunity when we talk about building relationships to sit down in that environment and share with someone else, right? Like there's just when, or you think about like, you know, that, app, what you're going to get from, Apple or, BMW versus Hyundai, like all those things. It's what's elicited in the mind of the consumer and their perspective. And so that's where I think the personal brand becomes important, because when I, think about your world in bakery, well, there's phenomenal bakers out there,
Yeah.
and you have multitude of choices. But what is it about the solicitor, the owner of that bakery, or chain potentially, if you've grown? For me, it's about quality, again, experience of, can you, have they been able to deliver quickly when something happens? Like there's all of these other elements that I think, really isn't important. And that's what builds influencer type status, but ultimately the propensity to recommend. And so
Mhm.
that's, a result of one's brand that's, built upon not just reputation, but, the ongoing consistent way in which they're showing up.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. I think it's almost an asset at this point. It's like a corporate asset. Even writers, like if they have large, I mean, I remember going to a book conference and they were like, "Oh, if you have a large social media following, you'll probably get published even if your stuff isn't great." Like it's a necessity now, just go do it. So, I guess we can conclude with personal branding, if especially depending on what you want to do. I mean, if you just don't want to have like, I don't know, personal brands help 100%, right? um okay, so now I get to move on to one of my favorite parts of this podcast, which is asking you my evergreen question, which is, what is a weird habit or ritual you have that makes your life more joyful?
um, I have two, and I don't. Well, I guess weird. Although my husband will say that and maybe it's neuroticism. I don't know. So I do not turn off the light and go to bed at nighttime without clearing every unread notification on my phone.
That could be
Which
a lot.
right, number one, but it gives me great, like I said, it's anxiety, it's me maybe being neurotic, one, but the other is, I'm a fitness fanatic, and so for me, what does give me great joy, and I block my calendar so no one will book me for early morning meetings, is I work out in the gym 6 days a week, and so for
Wow.
me, my commitment to that, my health and my fitness, and I listen to podcasts and great music or audiobooks while I'm doing it. That brings me great joy and sets me up, quite frankly, for whatever the long day ahead of me is going to look like.
Do you have a favorite activity for fitness?
Weight training is,
Weight training. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, me
Love
too. I love it over aerobics any day of the week. Ask me to lift 100 pounds, no problem. Ask me to run a mile, please.
it.
Yeah, now I'll run walk the mile, but like I'm a weightlifter. Victoria, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure having you and for sharing your expertise and wisdom. I know a lot of you are going to benefit from this out there. And if you'd like to hear more from Victoria, you can check out her website at www.victoriapeltier.com or see her speaking reel on YouTube. And you can follow her on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All the links will be in the show notes below. As always, I'd love to hear from you about this episode. What is your personal brand? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Farrah Haidar. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when a next episode is available. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farrah@farrahhaidar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon.